All right, so let's begin our rapid fire review for our unit on Congress, Unit 2A. We've got our flashcards here, so let's go ahead and move through them. A quick reminder, these are quick rapid fire reviews. This is not a comprehensive overview of every single thing we've studied in the unit. So this is a starting point for your studying. So the first two flashcards are basically things we've covered before. The first one, number of members of the House. That's 435, and that's determined by Congress. It's not in the Constitution specifically. Congress can change the number of members of the House. They have 2-year terms, and the requirements, they have to be 25 years old. They have to live in the state in which they represent. They have to have been a citizen for 7 years, and they're selected by the voters of the state. So they're selected by the voters of each state, the people. They're the closest branch, at least originally in the Constitution, to the people. In the Senate, again, we've covered this before. There are 100 members of the Senate, 2 per state. Of course, the House is based on population. I should have mentioned that. The Senate based on the 2 per state, equal per state. The requirements, 30 years old. You've got to be living in the state, citizen for 9 years. And although the Senate is also selected by the people in the modern era, under the original Constitution, it was actually selected by state legislatures. So that's a key difference between the House and the Senate, as the Senate was more removed from the people. And these are things we've talked about before. A couple of vocabulary terms, related to concepts we've already covered. The idea of enumerated powers. Enumerated simply means kind of listed and defined explicitly in the Constitution. We've covered this, of course. So Article 1, Section 8 has enumerated powers of Congress. And this is a distinction with implied powers. So that's the next slide. So I won't go through the enumerated powers, but know that you need to recognize those and know that Article 1, Section 8 is where you find those. And perhaps the most flexible is the elastic clause, which is the necessary and proper clause, which expands power. It's the last listed power in Article 1, Section 8, and is the basis for implied powers, in which the term can be interpreted loosely. It says that the Congress shall have the powers that are necessary and proper to carry out the foregoing powers. So they can pass any law that helps them carry out their powers, and that expands their power greatly. And we've talked about that before as well. So an important aspect of this unit is to understand how constitutionally the House and the Senate, the House of Representatives and the Senate, are different. So although they work and function and structure differently, not all of those are based in the Constitution, so we'll get to those a little bit later. But in the Constitution itself, if we talk about the House of Representatives, then the House is where revenue bills originate, so any bill that raises taxes, that has to start in the House. The House has the beginning of the impeachment process. So the House of Representatives is closer to the people. They begin the impeachment process. They pass articles of impeachment and impeach an elected official or a president. And they initiate revenue bills. So, the idea being these are powers that should be close to the people, especially the idea of raising taxes. That should come from the people themselves. No taxation without representation. On the Senate side, powers unique to the Senate. The Senate approves major presidential appointments, most notably judges to the federal courts, but also cabinet officials. They are this is a very important process. The Senate has a lot of control, especially if they are controlled by a party that is opposite to the president. They have a lot of influence over who the president can select to these important positions. In the Senate, they have the trial for impeachment. So there's a two-step trial, and the Senate is two-step process to impeachment: impeaching the House, trial in the Senate. The Senate also approves presidential treaties. So all of these things are in the Constitution itself when we talk about the differences between the House and the Senate. And the Senate is seen as the more elite branch, so to speak. They're there for longer. They have to be older to be there. There are fewer of them, so they're given these important powers for that reason. Now, moving away from some of those constitutional basics, we can now talk about how the Congress operates. And, Congress, the House and the Senate, they establish their own rules. They establish their own way of operating, their way of doing business. And committees are where a lot of the business happens. And we've talked about committees in our previous video, so I won't go into too much detail other than to just say that there are different types of committees where much of the business of Congress happens. You have standing committees. Standing committees are your permanent committees. They exist from one Congress to the next, and by Congress I mean 2 years, where you have a set of individuals who are elected to Congress. And you have committees that are on different areas of public policy, like finance or tax policy or judicial, the judiciary, so the courts, so they education as an example. So they are where legislative issues and discussions and debates about what bills and laws to pass. They're where that work will be done. And so if you get a position on a committee, then you have influence and power in Congress in that particular area, because before any bill comes to a vote before Congress, it needs to be voted on in committee and written in committee. A special or a select committee, that's a committee that's not permanent. Okay, so standing committees, they're permanent from one Congress to the next. They, and sometimes people can serve for many years on specific committees. But a special or select committee, they're created for a specific purpose. Typically some sort of investigation, perhaps. And then they'll disband. So they're not those permanent committees. They can deal with real specific topics. Now, a special committee can be a joint committee as well. And a joint committee is one that has members of both houses of Congress. And standing committees in both the House and the Senate, they typically have members of the House, and there's House Standing Committee, and then you have a separate standing committee in the Senate. But a joint committee, which could be a special committee, is one that has members from both the House and the Senate in it as well. This is actually a typo I'm noticing. This should say conference committee, which I will change on the actual printed version of this. If yours says standing committee, cross out standing and write conference committee, because a conference committee is a special type of joint committee that is created specifically to flesh out the differences between a bill that's passed in the House of Representatives and a bill that's passed in the Senate. Usually, if they're both dealing with a similar topic, a bill will get passed from one chamber, it'll go over to the other chamber, and it might get modified or changed a little bit and come out a little bit different. Both the House and the Senate, they need to pass the same exact version of the bill. So they'll create a conference committee to do that. And a conference committee is a special type of joint committee. So it'll be created for a big bill to reconcile those two, the House and the Senate, and then they'll go ahead and pass the same version after that. So this should say conference committee. We'll talk about a few more flashcards here. Speaker of the House of Representatives can choose their own speaker, and the speaker is mentioned in the Constitution, and they're chosen by the members of the House, so they're always a member of the majority party, because the majority party will kind of conference together. They'll figure out who they want to put all their votes behind for the speaker. And the speaker really can dictate, what bills are going to come up for a vote. They can figure out what the schedule and the strategy of the House of Representatives will be. They're a very, very important, influential figure. And so if the president, for example, is going to be negotiating with Congress and trying to, figure out where can they see eye to eye, you're typically going to see the president be calling the Speaker of the House first to say, can you get your party behind this specific issue or that specific issue? It's also worth noting that in the House of Representatives, you have what's called a Rules Committee. And you don't have that in the Senate. So a Rules Committee is something that, in the House of Representatives, they're very, very powerful and very important because they can define how a bill is going to be drafted, can amendments be added to a bill, how long will the bill be debated. Individual members of the House of Representatives, they don't have enormous amounts of power. They're really constrained by the rules in the House of Representatives that limit what individuals can do. And that's something we don't see in the Senate. So the fact that there's a Rules Committee in the House and not in the Senate is very significant in kind of orchestrating or explaining what the different ways of operating are between those two chambers. So this is a good place for me to stop for video number 1, and we'll pick up with the next flashcards in the next video.